Depuis plus de 15 ans, le Centre de recherche interuniversitaire sur la littérature et la culture québécoise, le CRILC, organise un cycle de rencontres annuelles avec des écrivaines et des écrivains québécois. Ces rencontres sont animées par des chercheurs et des chercheuses en littérature, aussi bien jeunes que plus aguerris, ce qui permet de mettre en dialogue les textes, les auteurs et les autrices et les savoirs. Cette année, les rencontres d'écrivains et d'écrivaines du CRILC sont consacrées à la littérature de langue anglaise au Québec, à la place qu'elle occupe dans l'espace culturel québécois. Les rencontres visent à encourager un dialogue sur les relations entre l'écriture et les institutions littéraires qui l'encadrent. Les conversations se feront en français, en anglais ou dans un mélange des deux langues. La première discussion de ce cycle d'entretien porte sur la scène littéraire anglophone au Québec, tant sur le plan créatif qu'institutionnel. Nous avons invité pour cette occasion Christopher DiRaddo, qui a travaillé comme publiciste auprès de la Fondation littéraire Métropolis Bleu, du Conseil des arts du Canada et de la Quebec Writers Federation. Il a créé la série de lecture et le club de lecture Violet Hour, qui ont à ce jour offert une plateforme à plus de 200 écrivains et écrivaines LGBTQ. Il est également l'auteur des romans de Family Way et de Geography of Pluto et a été président de la Quebec Writers Federation de 2018 à 2021. C'est Lori Schubert, directrice générale de la Quebec Writers Federation, qui anime cette rencontre. Elle a joué un rôle déterminant dans la fondation du English Language Art Network of Quebec et a rempli 2 mandats au sein de son conseil d'administration. Elle joue également un rôle consultatif auprès de Yes Montreal, de la Fondation Métropolis Bleu et de l'Atwater Writers Exhibit.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you to the CRILC for having us. It's really an honor for us to be invited to open this year's series on writing Écrire en anglais au Québec. Chris and I are good friends, and we've decided that rather than having me act as the moderator, we'd be more comfortable having a less formal conversation. So each of us will bring up points and question each other and maybe interrupt one another, who knows. And I'd just like to start with a disclaimer, since you're a research institute that's putting this on, that we are not academics. Our thoughts on this subject are probably not very theoretical. We're actors on the scene. I'm a working arts manager. Chris is a writer, but also has been a literary publicist. And, I don't know that either of us has enough time in our lives to really sit back and analyze all of these questions that we're going to be dealing with. But hopefully our experiences and the way we discuss it will lead to some interesting conversation for you to hear.
We've definitely been involved in it for a long time, I'd say, Lori. So yeah, I think we do have a bit of an opinion on the subject for sure.
That's for sure. And I'm going to actually, Chris, ask you to start, if you don't mind, by asking a question or raising an issue.
Of course. I mean, we've known each other like a long time, I believe, I think, and we met at the QWF. You've been a director since 2003. I started working with QWF in 2005, and so we've had a lot of opportunities to talk about things, but never kind of about like Quebec as a whole. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
I started working with you, I think at the time, I wasn't a published author. I started working as a publicist before then going on to become a board member and then president. And when we were approached about doing this, talking about the important institutions in Quebec's English language writing community, I can't think of one institution that is more important to English language writing Quebec than the QWF. And I'm curious, how you got your start. I don't think I really even know, how you got your start working for the Quebec Writers Federation.
Well, it's actually a sort of a funny, long, complicated story, but I won't tell the whole thing. But I moved to Quebec in 1990 from New York. I had gotten an MA in literature from Columbia, but I had decided after 2 more years working towards a doctorate that I really didn't want to be an academic. So I turned to my singing, which I was doing part-time, and became a professional singer in choral groups. And eventually my husband, who was teaching at Columbia, got a job here at McGill, and we moved up here, and I was taking jobs that I could find, and it turned out I was good at communication. So I was teaching over some number of years at McGill and a few years at Concordia, teaching written communications and oral communications. And during that time, I was doing a little bit of singing. And eventually, in 1998, my husband and I founded a professional chamber choir here, and I was managing that. So that's where I started to get involved with arts management. The group was called Viva Voce. I sang in the group too, so I was keeping that alive, which was fantastic. And I had a friend who lived in my neighborhood who was working at QWF, and she announced that she was going to be retiring like a year before she really wanted to leave. And she encouraged me to apply for the job. It was a part-time job at the time. As you said, it was 2003. They did not have an executive director. They had somebody who was coming in 20 hours a week. And that's what I did at the beginning. And yeah, I got the job through a circuitous route. Someone else got it first and then quit on his first day.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And the rest has kind of been history, as they say.
It's interesting because so many people that I know that work in like arts administration, especially when it comes to writing, are writers themselves, or kind of, trying to kind of make it as a writer. Do people often mistake you as being someone who also has those aspirations of being a writer because you work for the organization?
All the time.
Yeah.
I'm constantly approached by new members, and they'll ask me to read their work. And of course, I don't have time to do that. We have too many members for that. But also, I'm not I did study literature 1,000 years ago, but I'm not qualified to give that kind of feedback. And, I generally tell people when they ask what I write, I say grant applications, because that I do write quite a lot, grant applications.
And very well, I might say, as someone who's worked with you on the board, very, very well.
Thank you. And reports and things like that. I'm just not, I always tell people I don't really have a very creative idea in my head. I'm good at communicating clearly. I'm a good writer, but I don't do literary work. And that's why, it's one reason I love this job so much, is that I'm kind of in awe of all the people who do that kind of work.
Yeah. Did you have much experience with because you said you studied literature, but did you know much about like Quebec's literary legacy?
Oh my God, no.
Coming into it?
No, not at all. I studied 18th century British literature primarily. When we found out we were moving to Montreal, I bought a book on Quebec and was shocked. I'm embarrassed to say, I knew there was French up here, but I was shocked when I saw at that time the percentage of francophones versus anglophones in the province. It was 75% then. And I had no idea what was going on up here. And the only writers that I'd heard of who were from here, and I didn't even know it at the time, were Mordecai Richler and Leonard Cohen. Let me just ask you a couple of questions too,
Sure.
Chris, because when you joined QWF, I looked back, you joined in 2005. So you say that's when you started working with us as a publicist. Did you do one of those things before the other?
Yeah, I studied journalism and communication studies. I wanted to study creative writing. I applied to the creative writing program at Concordia several times, never got in, but I did get into the journalism and communications program. And, newspapers being what they weren't a lot of jobs in newsrooms at that time. I graduated in like the early 2000s, kind of like just around 1999, 2000. But there was a lot of work in communications and in publicity and PR. And I got my start as an arts publicist. I worked for l'École nationale de théâtre. And that led kind of like it just was a bit of a dominoes thing when you're being a publicist in Quebec. A lot of organizations need an English publicist and a French publicist. So I got a lot of offers for jobs as an English publicist. One of my first jobs was also for Bleu Metropolis, which is the Festival International Metropolis Bleu, multilingual literary conference here in Montreal. And I believe that's how I got connected with you, because I'd done the press for the festival. And then I believe QWF was looking for a publicist for their Literary Awards Gala, which happens every year in the fall. And I accepted the contract. And for me, it was such an eye-opening experience being at that gala. This was in 2005, I believe. So that was the first year. And there was this whole big community of writers and people that I didn't know.
That's what I was going to ask you, is if you already were I know you hadn't published a book yet, but
yeah,
were you already plugged into the literary scene?
Not at all. I think, it wasn't something that I even I have to say, even really thought about. I didn't know that there was such a community. I don't think I knew about the organization before then. I had aspirations of being a writer, but as I said, I had no training in it because I didn't study it at university, and even in high school, they never really taught us. At least in my experience, I never really learned about Quebec writers. I know that Quebec's English language writers, for instance, I think. Like Margaret Atwood was probably and she's Canadian. She's not a Quebec writer, but she's probably the only kind of Canadian writer that I think we really studied in high school.
Wow.
And I know, I knew who Mordecai Richler was, and like you, and then I knew who Leonard Cohen was. But this legacy of writing being done by Anglophones in Quebec wasn't something that I was familiar with. And I have to say, it was such a wonderful introduction to a world that I just discovered I wanted to be a part of. And, one of the first, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but 2006, I felt was such a really important year for a lot of writing in Quebec. So this was like the second gala. And I remember, for instance, Rawi Haj, right? He was nominated for a QWF award for De Niro's Game, which was,
Right.
And I remember, this was his first book. This is someone who, wasn't very far off from me, right? So I kind of felt like, oh my God, I've got a first book in me. And, he got nominated for the Giller. I think he got nominated for another prize as well. But he was nominated but didn't win. But then he won the QWF Hugh McClellan Prize for Fiction. And I remember him being on stage and talking about how great it was to be recognized by his own peers, by his own community. And, even though he was nominated for all these other big prizes, I mean, he did go on to win the Dublin. This was before the Dublin Award too, I should
That's
say
right.
too, right?
This is one of the biggest prizes in the world for that book, the Impact Dublin Prize.
But he did. But I do remember this, I think the QWF Gala was before that was announced and before I guess he even knew. But I just remembered it just being it was just such a beautiful community that this was kind of coming around literature and the voices that were kind of coming out of Quebec. I believe 2006 was also the year that Heather O'Neill published Lullabies for Little Criminals, which also kind of really kind of began her career as well. And I just felt coming into this community at a time when Quebec writers, in my mind, were getting all of this attention, and I was learning about them was just really, really exciting. So, it was such a fate for me because it really just began this kind of collaboration with the organization and just being a part of this community at that time. But I have to say though, even though I was also just the publicist for those first few years, it was really only that when I sat on the board though, the QWF board, that I really began to understand the scope of everything that QWF does. And I, we talked about this as being kind of the most important, I would say, kind of institution for English language writing in Quebec. But maybe for the benefit of the listeners today, you can speak a little bit about the programs and activities that QWF does, because QWF does so much.
Sure. Just going back first to one point that you made about being surprised by the gala. I was surprised the first time I went to the gala too. And I think, I believe that when I started at QWF, the profile of the organization was much lower than it is now. We certainly had fewer members. I mean, I think we had around 300 members then, and we have about 800 and something now. But also, we've done so much more in the community, not just within our own organization. But that being said, I will talk about the organization and what it does, and from its roots on to today. And it's basically, it was founded by the merging of two pre-existing organizations. One was FEWQ, F-E-W-Q, the Federation of English Writers of Quebec, and their primary activity was to offer writing workshops. And the other was QSPEL, the Quebec Society for the Promotion of English Language Literature, and their primary activity was what were then called the QSPEL Awards, so book awards. And they merged in 1998 and changed the name to Quebec Writers Federation shortly thereafter. So what we have grown to do is really, it's kind of a three-pronged approach to our mandate. which is the mandate itself is to promote English language literature in Quebec and to support the people who produce it. And we do it three ways. One is through professional development. Another one is by providing opportunities to publish, to work, to read, to win prizes. And the other one is to provide community. And that community obviously was already there when you went to the gala. You saw it in 2005, I think you said. But the community has broadened. I think the tent of the Quebec Writers Federation has gotten much larger in the subsequent years. In terms of professional development, we have workshops. We do about 30 workshops a year. Most of them are 2 hours a week for 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and they're on craft. So fiction, long fiction, short fiction, specific topics in fiction writing. Same thing for nonfiction. We might have a workshop in memoir and another one in creative nonfiction and another one in journalism or freelance, writing for magazines, something like that. And then we have some one-day workshops and other formats as well, shorter ones than the craft ones. And those are often on the business of writing. So we might bring in someone who's an expert in a field, like an agent or a publisher, or do something. Last year we did something really fun right before everything shut down. We did a workshop about getting to love the microphone, so that people who were hosting literary events or doing podcasts, perhaps, I should have taken the workshop, could spend a day really getting comfortable working with a mic. And we also offer consultation. So members who don't know what to do about, I don't know, the next step once they have a manuscript, will come to us and ask us for guidance, and we do that one-on-one. The second area is opportunities to read or publish. We have two online publications. One is Carte Blanche, which is a literary magazine. It's published 3 times a year. There's also a blog attached to that. We also have something called QWF Writes, which has been around now, I'm guessing, about 10 years. And it was a monthly column by writers for writers, mostly by QWF members. But sometimes we have writers in from other parts of the country. And that is a really great publication, but I think it's going to be undergoing a little bit of change in the coming year. So that's in the works. We also have a partnership with CBC Montreal called Indelible Ink this year, where we help them find 5 new, fresh voices to write blog columns for them for their website. We give, again, it's for the first time this year, although we have had a youth prize or youth writing prize in the past. This year it's called the QWF College Writers Award, and it's sponsored by the 6 English language cégeps in the province. And that's pretty exciting. We're going to be announcing the first winners of that at our gala in November. And we have a bi-monthly e-newsletter. Oh, actually, now it's once a month. We just got too busy with contests and calls for submission. So opportunities. We have the mentorship reading. We have the Words and Music show. We have Writers Out Loud, which is a series that in recent years has been focusing on marginalized voices, authors, not having them read, but having panels and discussions. So those are among the opportunities. Plus, for the more established writers among our members, of course, there are a lot of employment opportunities. We pay about 200 to 250 writers a year to either be workshop leaders or mentors. I forgot to mention the mentorship program, but that's another prong of the professional development. Or to be jurors. We have a lot of competitions for which we hire jurors, or we publish their work and pay them for that. So the bulk of our money goes to writers, goes into the pockets of writers. And then that last prong, as I said before, is community, the Facebook the community group, the membership events that we do sometimes. Well, this weekend we have one with ELAN, the English Language Arts Network. We're finally having an in-person gathering for the first time in, 19 months or something. And we have shut up and write events every 2 weeks when we're not offering workshops, so that people can just get together and follow the Pomodoro technique to write and produce some new material. We did those online, obviously, for the last year and a half. And then there's the QWF Awards Gala that you were talking about. And of course, all that goes with that, the whole visibility that's offered to the finalists and the winners. Yeah.
So there's that's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on. I
No,
think,
there's actually, I'm just going to say, because you said there's a lot, and I know that was already a lot, but there's so much more. I just want to mention some new exciting things. Like, we have a residency in Dublin, Ireland. It's called the Max Margley's Writing Residency. The first winner was announced in December of 2019, and she hasn't been able to go yet, but we're hoping she'll be able to go in the spring. And we also have an online literary database, and that might be of interest to the listeners because it's got, well over 2,000 books by, well over 1,000 authors. It's quebecbooks.qwf.org. And, it goes on. We have another very exciting addition to our package of what we offer that's going to be announced at the gala this year, but I can't talk about it yet.
Oh, okay. Well, looking forward to hearing about that. I think, though, when sometimes a lot of people compare our organization, I think, to like l'UNEC in Quebec, right? But we're quite different, I think, in many, many different ways. And when we talk about our members and our membership, they're not all published writers, right? So I think, when we talk about like writing in English in Quebec, we're not only talking about people who publish books, right? We're talking about also students. We're talking about people who have aspirations, who enjoy writing, right? So you said that we have like 820 members of QWF. Like, do you have a sense of like how many are like considered professional writers, meaning that they're publishing books, and how many are just members of the public who enjoy writing or have aspirations to publish?
Sure. We don't actually distinguish between those who write books and other people, but we do have a category called professional, for which you have to have professionally published at least 40 pages. So even an emerging writer who hasn't yet published a book may have published short stories or essays or poems, and so they get to be in that category. And that's the bulk of our membership, over half. So about, I looked recently, it was 430, I think, professional members, and 320 general members. So those are, let us say, aspiring writers or possibly hobby writers, a recently retired person who wants to take a workshop and work on their memoir. And then we also have a relatively, it's not been that long that we had a student category, but we have about 60 student members as well. And they pay $15 a year and get all of our publications, and they get a half price on our workshops and other advantages.
So you do keep a track then of like kind of the books that get published in Quebec every year, right? You mentioned the quebecbooks.org website, which has it's a really great database of all the English language works that's been published, at least in terms of like, I guess, books that have been submitted to the awards.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
It's a good catalog of that.
Yeah.
Do you get a sense? Do you know, for instance, like how many books, for instance, in this year, like, how many books came out that were submitted to the awards by
Yeah,
English language writers?
I can't be absolutely specific on that. I think it's over I think it might be like 110, 120 books this year. I'm not sure. It's always around 100 to 120. It varies from year to year. And in terms of genre, sometimes there are more poetry books than other years. There's usually a fair amount of nonfiction and a fair amount of fiction. And we also have a category for first book. So that's kind of fun to watch. I remember, maybe 10 years ago when we were being told that it was going to be the end of printed books. And I was really concerned, to see how that would be reflected in the submissions for the awards. But that category of first books is still very strong. We always get maybe 10, 15, sometimes even more books submitted in that category. So I don't know exactly. I didn't check recently, but I know we had at least 100 and probably more like 110 this year and probably last year too. There's another issue, which is that we have a translation prize, the Prize for Translation, Whole Foundation Prize. And that alternates between French and English as the target language. So in odd-numbered years, English is the target language, and we inevitably get many more books because we're getting 2 years' worth of books submitted. So we get, maybe 36, 40 books submitted in that category. And when it's the year that the books are translated from English to French, we don't get quite as many because I don't think we have as much profile with the Francophone publishers, although we do try to reach out to them. So that's an area in which I think we can do better in getting more of those books that are translated into French to be submitted for the awards and give those authors and translators an opportunity for some more visibility.
Yeah, because the awards is kind of like, I would say I don't know if I can say this, but I feel like it's the thing that I know QWF most for, and I think maybe some people do as well, because it tends, awards tend to kind of have that kind of splash and pizzazz,
Yeah. Well, I mean, as an author, I know maybe you haven't won a big prize, but what would it mean to you? What do you think it means to the people that you know being nominated for a literary award?
Yeah, I think, you'd mentioned there about 110 books maybe released in the last year. It's very few of them, I think, that will actually kind of make it over to, I would just say, to kind of like, I would say the mainstream, but like, for people to kind of know, I don't think people know, all 110 books being written in the last year by Quebec writers.
Right.
And which is unfortunate. And I think awards tend to kind of bring that attention, I think, to the work, sadly, I have not been nominated for a prize for my 2 books, including the QWF Awards. It's always been kind of a bit of a dream of mine, because I know what, as the publicist working for QWF, and also I should say too, I was also the publicist for the Canada Council for the Arts for the GGs, right? So I would promote the
Right,
works.
that's the Governor General's Awards.
The Governor General's Literary Awards, and I would promote the works in Quebec, not just by Quebec writers, but like I promote the short list in Quebec. But it was always great to see a Quebec writer on that list, because you kind of know what that means. Like someone like, I think I mentioned like Heather O'Neill or even Rawi Haj, like with their first books getting nominated for big prizes puts this spotlight on you. And I think, when we look at the writers from Quebec who are well known, they tend to be people who've been nominated for prizes or won prizes. So like, the top 10 off of like, people like Sean Michaels, right? Or Selima Nawaz, Dimitri Nasrallah, Kai Kalo.
And there's a whole group of young poets. I don't know if you're even aware. Tess Liam, Clara Duplessis, Yusuf Sadi, who was shortlisted for our award, our A.M. Klein Prize last year, is on the shortlist for the Griffin. The
Griffin Prize. Yes.
Yes. So I mean, there are always exciting opportunities for visibility to be nominated for those kind of awards.
It's even like, I feel like it's even more than visibility, because it's like it first of all, I think for a lot of people, it's a arbiter of quality, right? Like if you can kind of say that you've been shortlisted for a prize, all of a sudden, people are like, okay, well, this work is probably better than other works, so I don't have to kind of do the work about figuring out what's the next great thing.
Of course, it helps with sales. There's no question.
It does help with sales. I think it also boosts a writer's profile. So like a publisher might start putting ads in newspapers, right, which maybe they wouldn't have done before or didn't have the money to. It's kind of a bit of a sound bet to kind of maybe put a bit more attention around a title. Writers also get more invitations, right, to appear at festivals when that happens. You also you get invited to sit on juries, right? So it's weird. It's almost like you get introduced to this whole other kind of level of your career when just even one prize kind of
it's like an imprimateur, right? So you're just suddenly you've arrived. But I have to say, as someone who gets to see, maybe this is controversial to say, but someone who gets to see behind the scenes of literary awards, like to read the jurors' reports and so forth. I think, and I'm saying this because there's so many writers out there who have not yet been nominated for an award or have not won. And it doesn't mean that they weren't like somebody's second choice, out of all those hundreds of books that are out there. It's a bit of a crapshoot, right? Because who you get on your jury, what their preferences are, um, you know, I do believe that a better sign of true literary greatness is being nominated for multiple awards, even if you don't win them, rather than winning one big one. Because, it's the consistency. It's that you turn out work after work and it's nominated. That I think should be valued more than just winning.
For sure. And like you said, I mean, there are so many writers in Quebec who continue to write, don't get nominated for prizes, and continue to publish really great work, and I think, our job as writers in the province, and also, I guess also as QWF members, is to just try to remind people of that, right? One of the things, like this year, for instance, Canada is guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair this year, right? I don't believe there are any English language writers who've been invited to. I could be wrong, but I mean, I did look over the schedule, and everyone from Quebec is a French language writer, which I understand. I mean,
I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't looked at the full roster, but I do know that that's an issue in Canada for us. And maybe here's where we're really moving into the difference between being an English writer in Quebec and the experience that an English writer in BC, for example, would have. And that is that when festivals are looking for representation from Quebec, their mind goes to the French community and the French literary scene here. And so this is something that QWF has been sort of trying to have a little impact on through the years, because if you can only have a few people, if you don't have travel money for your reading series for just anybody from anywhere in the country, and you want to have representation from Quebec, there's a wealth of fantastic French writers here. So that's where the money has been going, and the opportunities have been going in the rest of Canada for the most part. And we did have, I will say, for a while, for sort of a glorious 5 years, we had a fund available from the Canada Council for the Arts that allowed us to pay for honoraria and travel costs for our members who were invited to be at readings and festivals across the country. And that was fantastic. We were funding like around 50 writers a year who would not necessarily have been able to go otherwise, because the honorarium was, $125, and they had to get themselves to Winnipeg. So that was a loss, and it was a loss. It was a special grant. It had a limited time frame on it. We weren't punished and had have it taken away. But when the Canada Council went to their new format, to the new funding model, that particular kind of grant disappeared. And that's a hard thing to have to change. I mean, there's a pretty good reason why other provinces invite Francophone writers from Quebec. But unfortunately, what that means is that our writers are not necessarily known. Their names are not recognized, other than the Heather O'Neills and the Rowie Hodges and some of the people that you've mentioned who win the big national prizes. Certainly Louise Penny, is known everywhere. But for sort of mid-list writers, I guess you'd say, uh, they don't get those opportunities very much.
So we've spoken about the rest of Canada and how how maybe we'd like a little bit more attention paid to English language writers in Quebec, but also we can talk now a bit about like inside of Quebec. Does the English language community know about our province's writers, who live here? And how about the French language community? Is there an interest in our writers here? First of all, I want to thank, Quilk for this topic. I think that there is an interest because, we're doing this event. So we're really pleased to get this invitation. And, I know too, Lori, when I was on the board and we received the invitation from, for instance, the Salon du Livre, which is often, we don't always see a lot of English representation at the Salon, but there is that kind of invitation. I'm seeing a lot more bilingual readings, a lot more bilingual reading series. I think, especially the younger generation, there isn't any kind of real divide between English and French. You do see a lot of people reading in both languages. I think there is an interest in, when my book came out, Fig, which is a monthly French publication, they put me on the cover, which was so strange to me because I'm an English language writer. My books are not available in French, but there was enough interest in the title to kind of give it that kind of space. So I think, if you do live in Montreal, or if you do live in Quebec, I think there's more of a chance that you'll hear about our writers. I think, of course, more can be done. I know that I could learn more about French language writers in the province for sure. But I know that there is kind of a volonté, let's just say, to kind of like to reach out and to know each other's work a lot better, and also translate each other's work. Every year or so, there are more books that are being kind of released in the opposite language. Which I think also kind of creates those kind of connections.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned translation because just a couple of things come to my mind. And I wanted to say this when we were talking about the prizes, that I don't know if you saw that the GG nominations just came out for this year.
Yes.
I was very pleased. It's not that surprising, but I was very pleased to see that I think it's 4 of the 5 books that in the translation category were Quebec translators. I mean, that's not that unusual because, of course, there's probably more translation going on here. But I think, congratulations to some of our members, Katja Grubasic, Aaron Moray, Peter Feldstein, Helga Dasher. That was great. The other thing about translation is that, yes, this is a very good subject because we're trying to find ways to, we feel that our membership has more in common with the membership of UNEC, for example, than the difference of language. And we're looking to do more work with them, to collaborate with them, to have more of a voice with the Francophone literary community. And that's the work partly of our relatively new president, since you stepped down, Julie Barlow, who writes in both French and English and who has contacts at UNEC and, has been reaching out to them. The other thing is that, just apropos of translation, is we do have a brand new translation mentorship that we're doing in collaboration with the LTAC, the Literary Translators Association of Canada. And this first year, it will be awarded to someone who is translating into English, and we're going to manage that. But next year, the plan is that it will be awarded to someone who's translating into French. And it was named after Karen Monton, who was a beloved member of both the Literary Translators Association and QWF. And she passed away very recently, I think in September. And that was just when we were getting ready to launch the prize. So we've gotten the permission from her family to name the prize after her, and that's been really well received. Sorry, I've gone off track, but when I think of these things, I think this issue of translation and working French and English together. For example, in this year's Salon du Livre, we're doing an event on the stage at the Palais des Congrès. That is a translation event. So we will have 4 people and a moderator, and it's a discussion of translation. We'll have everything represented, an English writer, an English translator, a French writer, a French publisher of translation. So it's going to be an interesting event. And I do think that, because we have been doing events at the Salon du Livre for the last 3 or 4 years, I do think that doing bilingual events is really important for us there, because by far the majority of the people who are going to pass by and decide whether to sit in are Francophones. And it's a nice way to let them know we're here, we speak French, and we have the same interests and same concerns about the role of literature in society here.
We've talked quite a bit about QWF and its programs, because it's, like I said, it is kind of very important institution. But there are other institutions as well, kind of in the province, that are just as important to a writer. I often think of Montreal as being, I want to say, kind of part like underground. Like, it's funny because it's just like, it's a small community, but at the same time, like there's like there's a lot of like overlap. So like, you'll kind of meet people who are writers, and oftentimes they've got a toe in one or two or three of the same things. And so I kind of thought it would be fun for us to talk a little bit about the other kind of institutions and what their relationships with writers are like.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mentioned Concordia. I didn't get into the creative
I
writing
know. I
program.
wanted to ask you about that. Can I just interrupt for a second and ask you?
Sure.
I mean, it's not about the institution. We can do that. But how important do you think it is to get to graduate from a creative writing program?
It's a good question. I think, I mean, I published 2 books without it. So, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but I think, the thing that I would have loved to have, I was kind of self-taught. So I read a lot of books. I read, but I don't feel, that's why this interview is interesting to me, because like I didn't study Quebec writing. I didn't study Canadian literature in the way that I would have had I gone to school for it, I wouldn't have met, I wouldn't have met maybe, I'm going to say the right people, but like, sometimes when you do get into a program, you make really important connections. I think, a lot of publishers, a lot of agents look at the writers that are coming out of the different kind of creative writing programs in the country. So I think that again too is this like stamp of approval. If you've kind of gone through how many years of like education at one of the prestigious universities and were taught by some of the best writers in the country, I think people are more willing to take a chance on you. And yeah, you meet they like. They bring in all these wonderful guest teachers, and there are the faculty that work really hard. So I mean, I wish I had graduated from it, but I don't necessarily know if it's completely necessary in that sense. Like, I don't think you're not going to be published if you don't.
Yeah,
get
I mean, I
published
hear
by
a
it,
lot
but-
of people who did not go to Concordia, but in the international scene, I've heard a lot of people who are successful writers who did go to MFA programs and who might say that they didn't need to, that it didn't really. And we've had people, I have to say, more than once, we've had people take our mentorship program, so one-on-one with someone, which lasts for 4 months, and say, I learned more in those 4 months than I did in my years at well, I won't say Concordia, but I just did.
But I mean,
anyway,
I think
but
one
the
of the
other
things,
thing, I mean, in terms of institutions, one of the reasons that Concordia is really important is that it brings writers to Montreal from the rest of Canada. And so I think
then they don't leave.
Yes,
sometimes they
right.
don't leave. They stay and they become part of the community here for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think another great thing too about like Concordia and like getting into one of those programs is also the time to write, right? Like I think I didn't really get into the program, so I didn't have like this like kind of like year-long thing where I had a manuscript that I can kind of polish and work on, and so for me it was a lot of my writing was done on the side of my desk, right? It was done late at night, or if it was done on weekends, or I had 15 minutes here and there, whereas maybe I would have produced something a lot more quicker or a lot more polished had I gone through.
Yes, but it would have been callow. You would have been too young.
Maybe, yes. Hey,
Maybe
I'm happy with my path. I
yeah.
would say.
Maybe because you had experience working with the Blue Metropolis Festival, maybe you could talk about that as an institution.
Sure. That to me was also kind of very formative along with the QWF. This was started by Linda Leith. I don't remember the year, but she started it as a bilingual, I think it was trilingual actually at the time. I think it was English, French, and Spanish. And you would go to the festival and you could kind of take part in events in any language. The artistic team would bring in international writers from around the world. And I think, one of the things that made Blue Met stand out was that it actually was inclusive of multiple languages, whereas like some other kind of festivals were mainly for Francophone writers. Blue Metropolis was multilingual. And I have to say, because it was multilingual, it was seen as an anglophone organization. I was a publicist, like I said, for many years, and even though there were a lot of French language writers that we would bring in from France or also from Quebec, because I think the figurehead, because Linda Leith was an anglophone, it was kind of seen as being an English festival, which I think also kind of kept some Francophone public away. I think it was kind of seen as being something for Anglophones rather than something that was a little bit more kind of inclusive. I think now it's definitely different. I mean, there's a different, William Saint-Hilaire and Marie-André Lamontagne are heads of the festival. They're Francophone. But I still think the organization is largely seen as like an Anglophone one.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah. But I know that like, when I have a book coming out, if I'm an English writer in Quebec, I want it to be at the festival. Like for me, it's probably the most important festival to be at in the province, because I know that
Right.
that's where I'm going to be able to kind of reach readers.
Yes, yeah, because there certainly is good attendance at the festival from
Mhm.
English language readers. That's for sure.
Another is kind of like all of our bookstores. Like, we have so many wonderful English language bookstores and also bilingual bookstores as well in the province. And I can speak mostly about Montreal because that's where I live. For instance, like Paragraph Books has been a supporter of the Quebec Writers Federation for a very long time. I know that they've sponsored the Hugh McLennan. No, I apologize. What's the
Yeah, that's
one?
correct. It's
That's
the
what that is.
Paragraph Hugh McLennan Prize. It's actually, and Paragraph is owned by, I believe, Renaud Bray. So it's actually a Francophone institution behind it, but it is certainly an English bookstore.
It functions also very independent. It's also like I think it's owned by art. Like
No, I think it's Renaud Bray.
it is Renova. Okay.
Yeah, it was Archambault before.
And then there's all like the kind of like independent bookstores, like Drawn and Quarterly, which is also kind of a publisher. They did my launch, which made me feel very proud to kind of be part of it. Just they're such an important part of the Miland neighborhood in Montreal. There's also the Word Bookstore. Argo.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of these places kind of kept open during the pandemic and kept people kind of like in books, being able to kind of to get books. For me, like this was like way back in the day, but like L'Androgyne, which is a French name, but it was a kind of a bilingual bookstore. For me, that was the source of most of my reading. It's where I got like most of my kind of like education. I didn't get it at school, but I kind of got it from the bookstore. That was a place that was very, very important to me. We could kind of keep going on with bookstores, like Double Hook also was such an important part.
Oh my
of,
God, yeah, that was a loss.
Do you want to speak about that store?
Yeah, well, the Double Hook was on Green Avenue in Westmount. It was really right in the center of Westmount, and it was. I can't go into the years of the history, but Judy Mappin and Holden. What was her name? Do you know the other
I'm
owner?
sorry,
Yeah,
no.
there were 3 women at the beginning, but the one who became really, you know, part of it's pretty much an institution herself was Judith Mappin, and it was a bookstore. It was the first bookstore in Canada, I believe, that featured only books by Canadian authors, and everyone thought they were crazy. And the book it did extremely well, and it really opened a world for Canadian authors and for local authors who were able to do launches at the site. Judy was much beloved. One of the prizes we give every year is a community award, which when Judy died a few years back, we renamed the Judy Mappin Community Award. Anyway, the bookstore did finally close, and it was replaced quite a while by Babar Ramville, which was also really. There's Babar Books in Pointe Claire and Babar Ramville, and that's also another, for children's and young adult books, that was another institution. And now the Pointe Claire store is the only one that's left, as far as I know. There's also that Distill, is that what it's called, on Duluth?
Yeah, that's a new store that just opened up on Duluth. I've been a couple of times. It's a beautiful store run by a woman from France who just loves French books and kind of opened up a bookstore on Duluth.
English, you mean? Yeah.
In English. Sorry. Yes, in English. And one of the things also that happened in the last year, which I'm not sure if many of our listeners might know about, was, S.W. Welsh is kind of also a very famous bookstore in Montreal that's been around for a very long time. They were about to be evicted. We see that a lot, kind of that's happening in different neighborhoods in Montreal. And the writing community, and I'm not going to say just the English language writing community, but kind of like it was a mixture of English and French writing community, got together and put a pressure on the owners of the building, and it actually kind of worked in their favor. They were able to kind of keep the bookstore open. So you can kind of see how important I think, bookstores are to our writing community.
Yeah. And one of the other institutions that I've been thinking about is the Association of English Language Publishers of Quebec, which we share our office space with. It's a tiny organization with one full-time employee and the executive director. And then it has members who are English language publishers in Quebec, and there are probably 30 of them or more. But the major, the best known ones, I think, for literary work are probably Véhicule Press, Linda Leith Publishing, Baraka Books, and some newcomers on the scene by young people, Metonymy and Metatron. Do you thinking of others?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really exciting. We were talking about that, like there are new bookstores that continue to open, but also new publishers, right? Like you were mentioning Metonymy Press. They're trying to give voices to trans and gender nonconforming writers, which I think is really great. I think when we think back to when I think back to my beginnings and stuff like that, I didn't feel like there was a lot of diversity. I should have to say probably in 2005 when I was looking around, but now it is. I'm an LGBTQ writer myself, and I never really was. I published with Vehicle Press, which is not an LGBTQ publisher, and I think when I started out, I felt that I probably would have to kind of relegate myself to a niche. And I don't really feel like that's the case. I feel like people are very much interested in a bunch of different voices, especially here in Quebec.
Yeah. And those two publishers, Metonymy and Metatron, are doing some great work. I mean, we're seeing their books reflected in the finalists for the literary awards, which is fantastic. The other thing that's important about AELAQ, and this is really what hits the public eye, is that they're the publisher of the Montreal Review of Books. And that is certainly an institution of importance in our community.
Super important.
Yeah.
And you're all at the Atwater Library, which is, I think, another place we haven't really
yeah.
talked about as well. But the Atwater Library is just such an important location, I think, too, in terms of in the writing community here in Quebec.
Yep, and you can include also CBC Montreal, CBC Quebec, which goes out of its way to work with us, to find ways to partner with us on projects. And then I think one of the things that we haven't talked about and that you can speak to a little bit is reading series.
Yeah, I run a reading series called The Violet Hour. It's an LGBTQ reading series. And, it's important for us to find opportunities for, to showcase our writers. I'm noticing it too in terms of the other series. There's Logos reading series, the Atwater Poetry Project, Accent. And one thing that we're seeing a lot more now of also is storytelling. So Confabulation, which is storytelling, an evening of people getting up and recounting stories on stage, extremely popular and really kind of important for people who are writing here in Quebec.
Yeah, and Logos is a bilingual series, and it's also one that features both really well-established writers and absolute beginners, which is wonderful. I mean, if you go to one of their meetings, it's literally heartwarming. It's just, everybody's there and everybody is respectful of one another. And it's sometimes a first opportunity to read for someone. So it's great.
For sure. And I think all of these things they kind of make up our culture and our community here, right? I think, like I was saying, it's whether you come in through Concordia and maybe you grew up in Toronto and then came to Concordia and then you stayed, or whether you got your first book published with one of the local publishers, everyone kind of knows each other in a weird way. I feel like it is part of a family, and for me that was kind of a really wonderful thing, is that I felt very much kind of supported by the community here as a writer.
Great. Well, I think our time is getting short, and I do think we've kind of proven that English language writing in Quebec isn't just a minority literature, and that the culture here is pretty vibrant. But I know that people always ask, this happens at festivals a lot, they ask Montreal writers or Quebec writers, what's it like to be an English writer in Quebec? What are the unique qualities of being a writer in Quebec if you're writing in English, and what makes a Montreal writer? If you are from Toronto originally, or BC, or somewhere in the prairies, at what point do you become a Montreal writer? So I'm kind of wondering what you think about this, because again, you're the writer here.
I don't know. I have lots of thoughts about it. I think, there's a romanticized notion of Montreal as a city that people can, flock to, that artists come to, right? Whether you're a musician or a writer, that, the rents are low, so you'll be able to, survive on your writing. Not so much anymore these days, I have to say. But, some writers choose not to write about Montreal or choose not to write about Quebec, and there's still Montreal writers, there's still Quebec writers. But some of us do, I think, that is a quality that I know that I like a lot in the works that come out of Quebec. I like seeing my experience reflected in the literature that I read, whether that is like, having characters who are anglophone and francophone, having a bit of French in your text, setting it in the neighborhoods that you find familiar. I think that's what I think a lot of people do enjoy about writing that comes out of Quebec. At least I've heard that from some people. Someone like Salima Nawaz's book or Sean Michael's book. They set their stories also in the Mile End off of Park Avenue, and I think that to me is like kind of that quality of the people who live and breathe and exist on the island. I think it's really kind of alive in the literature that comes out of the province. So it is hard to say because like I said, some people are not writing about the province at all, but they're still part of our community. Like someone like Louise Penny, she's writing a lot about Quebec. She's writing a lot about a fictional town though. But at the same time, it's just such a big part of our culture, and I feel like there's a very
the Sûreté du Québec is certainly very, very much plants that book in this province.
I think there's a real good sense of place in a lot of the literature that comes out of this province, and I'm very proud of the work that continues to be published in Quebec.
As am I, and our members are amazing, and they just keep outdoing themselves. It's very exciting.
So, Lori, like you said, we have to kind of wrap this up pretty soon. But you're the executive director of the most important writers group in the province. How do you feel? Like, what's exciting you, I guess, at the moment in terms of maybe even your future projects or what QWF is involved in or kind of sees on the horizon for the province?
Well, I'm always excited because we're always working on something new or planning something. But like as I look at the scene, I think we still have a couple of challenges. We need to get more eyes on Quebec books, even within Montreal. More readers of our writers' books, but certainly throughout the province. And one of the projects that we launched during the pandemic is called Storyscaping. It's a project to send writers to the regions of Quebec and have them work with groups of English people who want to write in English. I just want to say we have a lot of members of QWF who do not have English as their first language, but are writing in English. That's the key point. So that I think will get more people interested in literature and perhaps get more people aware of the community of writers that we have. And of course, our Writers in the Community program, which I didn't even have time to talk about before, where we work with at-risk youth and they meet writers for the first time in their lives. And so many of them are so inspired. And I'm hoping that in addition to helping them deal with the challenges in their lives in more productive ways through language, that they're also becoming potential readers. And I think that's really important. I think it's an important job for us to do. And finally, and I really do mean finally, because I think we're probably out of time, we've been working for the last few years on inclusivity. And we have a program called Fresh Pages, which is really sort of an umbrella for a way to create opportunities for people who may have suffered barriers because of racial or financial problems. So it's primarily for BIPOC writers, and we're creating opportunities for them. All of these things are creating, as I said, a bigger tent under the heading of QWF. Languages, we have much more diversity in the organization than we had 15 years ago. And I think a much brighter future because of it. And I mean that beyond the literary world. I think that the English language community of Quebec is becoming more, I believe, becoming more diverse. And I think that can only be good for the province as a whole.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Lori. This has been such a fun conversation. Like I said, we never get to have these kind of conversations.
I know. Well, I don't think we're going to sit down and do it every month, but it was a treat, Chris. So thank you again to Quilk for having us. And that's it from us.
Merci d'avoir écouté cet entretien avec Christopher DiRaddo et Lori Schubert. Un entretien réalisé en collaboration avec Magnéto et qui s'est enregistré virtuellement dans le respect des consignes de distanciation sociale. Pour découvrir d'autres auteurs et autrices, retrouvez tous les épisodes des rencontres d'écrivains et d'écrivaines du CRILC sur votre application balado préférée.